In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, they chose the wrong person to provoke, and by the time they realized, it was already too late. The morning haze wrapped itself around the sleepy frontier town of Dustmere like a memory it couldn't let go of. Fog crept between sun-bleached wooden buildings, slipping under closed doors, seeping into still warm hearths. Wagons rattled by slowly, the horses too tired or too wise to rush. And in the center of it all, on the steps of the small, creaking train depot, stood a woman whose eyes hadn't stopped scanning the horizon for the better part of 2 hours. Her name was Marigold Vance. Not Mary, not Goldie. Not any of the watered-down names men tried to hang on her when they thought a soft tone would earn them her trust. Her mama had named her Marigold, after the only flower that had dared bloom on their hardscrabble homestead. And like that flower, Marigold had survived dust, drought, death, and the kind of loneliness that thickened the skin like calluses on a blacksmith's hands. She adjusted her coat borrowed, oversized and smelling faintly of old soap, and clutched a single letter in her gloved hand. The corners were soft from reading, rereading, tracing the words that had come from a man she'd never met. Mrs. Vance, it read in clean, strong script. I'm not a man of many words, but I'll do my duty. I will arrive on the 10:15 train if you'll still have me. Respectfully, Mr. Elijah Mercer. The paper didn't smell like tobacco. The ink hadn't run. There was no poetry in it. But something about the letter had stopped her where so many others had failed. Maybe it was the honesty. Maybe the silence between the lines. Or maybe it was because, deep down, she had no one else to hope for. The town clock struck 10. The track sang low, and the steam whistle cut through the silence like a blade. The train pulled into Dustmere with a hiss and groan, shaking the boards under her boots. Marigold stood straighter, heart thumping like the hooves of 1,000 wild mustangs. She tucked the letter back into her coat and watched as strangers stepped off. A traveling merchant, a family with 2 sleepy children, a preacher clutching a rain-damaged Bible, and then he came, tall, broad-shouldered, a long coat dusted with trail grime, a satchel over one arm and a slow, steady gait. He looked like a man who had walked through worse places than this, and never once lost his footing. Elijah Mercer. He stepped onto the platform, paused, and scanned the waiting crowd. His eyes were dark, unreadable, like the letters he'd sent. Quiet, careful, and edged with something unspoken. Marigold didn't wave, didn't smile. She waited until his gaze found hers and held it. He stopped walking. Neither of them said a word for several heartbeats. Then finally he nodded. Mrs. Vance, he said. His voice was low, quiet, like a confession meant for one pair of ears only. Mr. Mercer. They stood there, framed by the rising steam and curious eyes. 2 strangers bound by paper promises and a shared understanding of what silence could mean. He looked older than she expected. Not in age, but in weight. Like the years had pressed down hard on him and he'd learned to carry them without complaint. You came, she said. I said I would. There was no affection in his tone. No hint of the nervous anticipation that had kept her awake for nights. Just calm, absolute certainty. The kind that wrapped itself around a sentence like a promise carved in stone. She handed him the marriage license. Already signed. Legal. Final. We can go to the chapel tomorrow, she said. He took it, studied it, nodded. You have somewhere to stay? I do now. He followed her down the dirt path to her homestead without asking questions. Just a man with a bag and a promise, walking next to a woman who had no more illusions left to hide behind. And neither of them noticed the way eyes followed them, or how, across the street, under the canopy of the general store, a man leaned against the post with a sneer curling at the edge of his mouth. Jesse Caulfield, Dustmere's self-proclaimed overseer. Banker, sheriff, and judge when it suited him. He watched Marigold walk with her new husband, like a child watches a hawk circle its prey. And as the dust settled behind them, Jesse's smile grew wider. He had plans for the Vance homestead, and no silent stranger from the east was going to get in his way. The sun was climbing by the time they reached the edge of Marigold's land, a worn trail that cut through brittle prairie grass and sagging fence posts. The Vance homestead wasn't much to look at, not even by frontier standards. A 2-room cabin, some lean-to sheds, a well that needed deeper digging, and a garden plot she hadn't had the heart to plant since last spring. The porch steps creaked under their boots, and when Elijah paused there, he took it in the way a man might regard a battlefield, quietly, fully, without judgment. Marigold glanced at him, unsure whether he was disappointed or just absorbing the silence the way she did. He said nothing, just set down his bag with the careful deliberation of someone used to never quite unpacking. "There's coffee inside," she said. "It's not hot anymore, but it's strong." He nodded and followed her in. The cabin was clean in the way poverty makes things: clean scrubbed wood floors, patched curtains, only the necessary furniture. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. He took it without comment, sipped it, then settled into the chair by the hearth like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The silence stretched. She didn't rush to fill it. Finally he said, "You're alone out here?" She shrugged. "Been alone a while. My brother died 3 winters back. Fever. After that, it was just me." Elijah's eyes didn't flicker. "And the town?" "Dustmere's full of people who think kindness is a weakness. Or maybe they forgot how to offer it. Jesse Caulfield's made sure of that. He's got a finger in everything, and he never lets go. I owe on the land. Not much, but enough that he's sniffing around, waiting for an excuse." "Why the ad?" "Because I'm tired," she said plainly. "Because I wanted someone who wouldn't try to own me, or fix me, or break me. Just someone who would stay." He studied her then, not with surprise, but with the quiet kind of understanding that made her stomach tighten. "All right," he said. They finished the coffee in silence. That afternoon, they worked the fence. Elijah moved like a man who'd done the job before, his hands sure even if his body bore old stiffness. She watched him dig out rotten posts, replace them with what little pine she had left, wrap barbed wire like it mattered to him. He never spoke unless necessary. And yet, his presence was louder than most voices she'd heard. By dusk, sweat clung to the collar of his shirt, and he stood at the edge of the field, looking out across the darkening prairie like he expected it to reach for him. Marigold wiped her hands on her skirt and brought him a tin plate of beans and bread. "It's not much," she said. "It's honest," he replied. They ate by lantern light on the porch. The air smelled of dirt and sage. Somewhere a coyote called out into the night. After a long while, Elijah said, "I don't sleep much." She nodded. He looked over at her. "You afraid?" "Of what? What happens next?" She swallowed. "Not anymore." It was the truth. When morning came, Jesse Caulfield was waiting. He showed up on horseback with 2 of his boys, both of them the kind of thick-shouldered, slack-jawed men who lived off fear and whiskey. Jesse wore his badge pinned to a coat far, too clean for someone who'd ever done an honest day's work. He dismounted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Miss Vance," he said. "Thought I'd stop by, check on things. Word travels fast, you know. Heard you got yourself a husband." Marigold stood on the porch, Elijah beside her. He said nothing. "We signed the license yesterday," she replied, steady. "We'll make it official at the chapel by Sunday." "Well, that's sweet," Jesse drawled. "Marriage is a sacred thing." Brings a tear to the eye. His gaze flicked to Elijah. "And you are?" Elijah said nothing, just looked at him. Jesse chuckled. "Not a talker, huh? That's fine. Makes it easier for folks to lie without realizing." Marigold felt Elijah shift slightly beside her. Not toward Jesse, Not away either. Just aware. You here to collect? She asked, arms crossed. Jesse shrugged. It's the first of the month. Payments due, same as always. She disappeared inside, came back with the envelope of bills she'd set aside. Jesse took it, counted slowly, then frowned. You're short. It's what I have. Jesse looked past her at Elijah. You planning on earning your keep, Mr. Mercer? Or is the lady still doing all the heavy lifting? Elijah stepped forward. Just one step. Jesse's hand drifted near his belt. A gesture more habit than threat, but one that made Marigold's skin go cold. Easy, she said quietly. Elijah stopped. Jesse grinned again. Well, I'll give you a week to make up the difference. Be a shame if I had to put a lien on the property. Got a fella in town itching to turn this place into a grain mill. You do that, Elijah said. Jesse turned. What's that? Elijah met his eyes. You put a lien on this land. You threaten her again. You come back here with men like that, riding tall on fear and dirt, and I promise you, you'll leave with fewer than you came with. The silence afterward was heavy. Jesse squinted. You threatening me? No, Elijah said, stepping off the porch. Just letting you know how far I'm willing to go to keep my word. The way he said it, so calm, so absolute, made Jesse pause. Then he laughed. Well, I'll be. Looks like the mute's got teeth. He backed toward his horse. We'll see how long those last. You folks have a pleasant week. Marigold waited until the dust had settled before turning to Elijah. That was stupid. Maybe. He'll come back. Elijah nodded. Let him. There was no bravado in his voice, no bluster. Just the kind of certainty that came from having walked through worse. And Marigold, standing beside him on that weathered porch, realized something that both terrified and comforted her. This man would die. For her, but more than that. He intended to live for her too. The wind shifted on the third morning, rolling in dry and sharp from the west. Marigold stood at the edge of her garden bed with a spade in one hand, staring at the soil that cracked like old leather. She hadn't meant to plant anything, not yet, not with debt hanging over her like a storm cloud, but Elijah had spent the previous evening repairing the fence around it. And somehow that quiet act had changed everything. She sank to her knees and started digging. From inside the barn, Elijah worked the pulley system on the well. The rope creaked and snapped, stiff from disuse. The water came up muddy, not much, but enough to wet the roots of a hope that had long since withered. By noon, they'd tilled 2 rows. By dusk, 3. They didn't talk much while they worked, but there was something blooming in the silences between them. Something she didn't want to name. Not yet. Naming things too early had a way of ruining them. After supper, they sat on the porch again, elbows resting on knees, watching the stars come alive. You ever think about leaving? Marigold asked, voice soft. Elijah didn't answer right away. I think about not running. The words hung there a long while. Then she said, that's almost the same thing. He nodded. The next day, the preacher arrived. Pastor Granger came in a buckboard wagon, with a Bible too worn for ceremony and a voice like cracked timber. He was old enough to have buried more people than he remembered marrying. You sure? He asked Marigold as they stood by the fence line. I am. And you, son? Elijah met his gaze. I said I'd be here. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was more than promise. It was the kind of vow you didn't say unless you meant to keep it. The ceremony took 5 minutes. 6, if you counted the time it took for Granger to pull his boots from the mud. There were no guests. No music. Just wind and a pair of hawks circling above like sentries. But when Elijah took her hand, when his thumb brushed the curve of her knuckles, Marigold felt steadier than she had in years. Granger muttered a blessing. Then, with a glance toward the barn, he added, God keep you, both of you. Jesse doesn't bless unions he can't control. Marigold nodded. Elijah said nothing. Granger left without asking for supper. He knew better. They spent that night apart, he in the barn's loft, she in the cabin. But the weight between them had changed. Not heavier, just present. At sunrise, the knock came. Marigold opened the door to find a boy no older than 14. Breathless from riding. His face was pale beneath a film of dust. "Ma'am," he said, "they took Pastor Granger." She stepped outside, heart stalling. "Who?" "Men with Jesse. Said the preacher was preaching against the law. Said he was stirring trouble." Elijah emerged from the barn, tucking his shirt into his trousers. He didn't ask questions. He just went to the trough, splashed water on his face, and reached for the rifle leaning against the post. "Elijah," he stopped, looked at her. "I have to go," she swallowed. "It's not your fight. You married me. That means I don't get to choose which fights matter." She stared at him, fire in her chest. Not from fear, not from anger, but from the awful realization that she would follow him, even if it led to blood. "Then I'm coming too." The boy blinked. "Ma'am, she's coming," Elijah said. "Get the horse." They rode in silence. The boy led, Marigold behind him, Elijah trailing. Dustmere didn't look different as they approached. Same crooked signs, same tired windows, but something had shifted. People stood outside their homes, watching, not helping. They found Granger tied to the jailhouse post, blood at the corner of his mouth. One of Jesse's men, Franklin, mean as a mule with a bad hip, stood nearby with his shotgun. Elijah dismounted, handed his reins to Marigold, and walked forward without hurry. "He needs a doctor," Elijah said. Franklin spat. "He needs a lesson." "Then you taught it. Let him go." Franklin squared his stance. "He's here by Jesse's order. You don't like it, take it up with him." "I plan to." The tension snapped like dry twine. Franklin raised the shotgun. Elijah moved faster. In one fluid motion. He twisted Franklin's wrist, knocked the barrel upward, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest. The shotgun fired into the air. Horses bolted. People screamed. Granger flinched. Then Franklin was on the ground, coughing. Elijah turned to the preacher, untied him, helped him stand. "You good?" Granger nodded. By then, Jesse had arrived. He stood on the jailhouse steps, hands on his hips, flanked by 2 more men. "You like testing lines, don't you, Mercer?" "No, I like moving them." Jesse descended slowly. "You think 'cause you got married, planted some squash, and beat up a cripple, you own this town?" Marigold stepped forward. "No, but we own our land. And we sure as hell own our voices." Jesse laughed, dry and mean. "You think these people will stand for that? You think they care?" Granger coughed, wiped his mouth. "They will." The preacher's voice was rough but firm. People heard it. Some took a step forward. Most didn't. But that was more than yesterday. Jesse saw it too. He pointed at Elijah. "You've got one warning. Next time you raise a hand, I won't be so polite." Elijah looked at him a long time, then said, "You've never been polite." Jesse's face twisted. He turned and stormed inside. Granger looked at them. "It's not over." Marigold nodded. "It never was." They rode home as the sun dropped low. That night they didn't sit on the porch. They didn't speak. They simply lay side by side on the cabin floor, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling above, listening for hoofbeats in the night. The 4th day dawned with a strange quiet, the kind that settled not on the land but in the bones. Marigold woke before the rooster, blinking into the pale morning light filtering through the window. Elijah was already gone from the floor beside her. She found him outside by the barn, feeding the horses with methodical care. His movements were steady, focused, as if tending animals was the only thing in the world he could control. She stepped down the porch. "You sleep at all?" "Enough. You're lying." He gave a half smile that never reached his eyes. "Habit." They shared A quick breakfast of dried fruit and biscuits. No words passed between them, but none were needed. Something hung in the air, something neither of them wanted to say aloud. The town was shifting. And not in their favor. By mid-morning, a rider came. He was a scrawny man with a long rifle strapped across his back and a bandaged cheek. Rode up like he expected to be shot at. Held up both hands as he dismounted. Name's Walt Duncan. I ain't here to make trouble. I just ... I thought you should know. Elijah came around the house with his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Go on, he said. Jesse's meeting folks. Behind the mill. Not just his boys, half the town. Talk is, he's pushing for a vote. Wants to make Dustmere private. His law, his rules. Said your stunt with Granger crossed a line. Said you're a threat. Marigold's throat went dry. A vote? Dustmere doesn't vote on law. It barely holds town meetings. Used to be. But Jesse's changing things fast. Elijah nodded once. Thank you. Walt shifted. I didn't say this, you understand? If he hears I did, I got a wife and 2 daughters who'll pay for it. You were never here, Elijah said. The man nodded, mounted, and rode off into the dust. Marigold watched him go, then turned to Elijah. What do we do? He didn't answer right away. Just stared out at the trail. We go to town. We stand where people can see us, and we wait. For what? For the ones who still remember what fairness looks like. She let out a breath. And if no one does, then we remind them. They hitched the wagon just after noon. Loaded it with baskets of turnips and preserved goods, what little they had. No weapons on display. Just survival dressed as commerce. A quiet kind of defiance. Dustmere's main street was livelier than usual. Not cheerful, not bustling, but brimming with tension. Heads turned as they arrived. Conversation stalled. Elijah set up a crate near the general store. Marigold laid out their goods. No one came close. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally a woman approached. Widow Haley. Gray dress. Broken shoes. She looked from Elijah to Marigold, then down at the jars. How much for the pear jam? 3 cents, or trade? The woman nodded. Pulled a worn thimble from her pocket. It's silver, real. Belonged to my grandmother. Marigold took it gently. Done. From across the street, Jesse watched. By sundown, they'd sold half their stock. Not much money, but plenty of eyes. Enough that Jesse finally stepped into the street. You 2 think you're clever, don't you? Elijah turned. No, just patient. Jesse sneered. You're making a spectacle. Marigold looked up from the table. It's called living. We still get to do that, right? Jesse ignored her. Pack it up, you're done. Elijah stepped forward. You planning to stop every honest man from doing business? You're not honest, you're dangerous. Because I freed a preacher? Because you don't know your place. The crowd stirred. Elijah saw its small movements, subtle reactions. People weren't walking away, they were listening. I know exactly where I stand, he said. Next to a woman who works harder than any man here. Next to neighbors who don't want to live under one man's thumb. Next to law that serves everyone, not just the loudest. Jesse took another step, hand on his revolver. You raise that hand, Elijah warned. You better be ready to bury friends tomorrow. A long silence, then someone behind Jesse said, Enough. It was Emmett Rowe, the blacksmith, built like a bear, voice like thunder. He told us this was for our protection, that he was trouble. But he ain't lifted a gun unless he had to. Others nodded. Jesse turned. You siding with him now? Emmett shrugged. I'm siding with Fair. Jesse's lip curled. You'll regret that. Maybe, but I'd regret cowardice more. Jesse spat, turned, walked off. The air held stillness for a long breath. Then, slowly, people returned to the stall, talking, trading, nodding to Elijah. Smiling at Marigold. When they packed up at dusk, Marigold whispered, "That was the start of something." "No," Elijah said. "That was the end of pretending." They rode home with the stars waking above them, and though the road ahead would still be long, they both felt it in their bones. Dustmere was changing, one stand at a time. The fifth day began with the weight of waiting. Not for danger. Marigold knew danger came uninvited, but for the moment when peace felt earned instead of borrowed. She stood at the edge of the property, staring down the long road from town, her arms crossed tight against the morning chill. Elijah was inside splitting wood. The steady rhythm of axe on stump echoed like a heartbeat. She wasn't afraid. But she wasn't calm either. The day before had shaken something loose in Dustmere. And when towns shake, people fall out, those who want change and those who want blood. By mid-morning, 3 riders appeared. 2 were strangers. The third wore Jesse's colors. Not a uniform, just a coat with a silver thread through the collar, his way of branding men he could manipulate. They stopped just outside the gate. Marigold didn't move, didn't wave, just watched them until Elijah stepped out, wiping his hands. "We're here to talk," the lead rider said. "Then talk," Elijah replied. The man dismounted, rough-faced, likely ex-militia from the way he carried himself. The other 2 hung back, hands near their weapons. "Jesse's willing to offer peace, for a price." Marigold stepped forward. "What kind of peace costs money?" "The kind that saves lives, yours, your husband's, the preacher's, that blacksmith too. He's making lists, he doesn't want a war." Elijah studied them. "You here to offer that or deliver a warning?" "A little of both. You stand down, shut your mouths, sell your crops and live quiet. No harm comes to you. Keep stirring folks up." "Jesse can't guarantee anything," Marigold scoffed. "Jesse never guaranteed anything but more of Jesse." The rider tilted his head. "That your final word?" Elijah looked him in the eye. "You ride back and tell him, we're not leaving. We're not hiding. And if he wants to talk about peace, he can come say it himself." The man nodded slowly, then mounted his horse and rode off without another word. When they were gone, Marigold turned. "You just put us square in his sights. We were always in them. Now he knows we won't flinch." That afternoon, a man named Silas arrived. He was tall, broad, and wore his years like armor. He walked with a limp and carried a satchel of tools. "Heard you needed help fixing the east fence," he said. Elijah blinked. "Who sent you?" "No one." "Heard what you did. Figured it was time someone helped." Behind him, 3 more men followed, Emmett Rowe among them. And Granger too, limping from bruised ribs but holding a hammer. By sundown, the fence stood taller than ever. The homestead looked like it belonged to a community instead of just one woman scraping through the years. That night, they shared supper, 8 people around a fire. Emmett told stories from the forge. Silas whittled while he listened. Granger said grace with a hand over his ribs and the other clutching Marigold's pear jam. Later, when the others had gone, Elijah stayed by the coals. Marigold brought a blanket and sat beside him. "You ever wonder if this is all just building toward something worse?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Sometimes worse is where better starts." She rested her head on his shoulder. And for a time, they just breathed. They didn't hear the horses until they were already too close. 6 riders, no torches. No warning, the crack of a rifle shattered the night. A bullet punched into the post near Elijah's head. He grabbed Marigold and rolled her behind the fire pit. Gunfire sprayed through the dark. The porch lit up with sparks and splinters. Elijah fired once, twice, dropped 1 horse. "Get to the barn," he shouted, but Marigold didn't run. She grabbed his spare rifle and fired through the smoke. 1 scream. 1 less enemy. The next minutes were chaos, shadows moving fast, hooves thundering. Men shouting names that didn't belong to anyone decent. And then, as sudden as it began, it ended. 3 men lay in the dust. One groaned. One bled into the dirt. One didn't move at all. The others had fled. Marigold's hands shook as she reloaded. Elijah's shoulder bled where a splinter had cut deep. He looked at her. "You hit?" "No." They stared at the bodies, breath catching in the cold. "You think Jesse sent them?" she asked. "Does it matter?" Marigold looked toward town. Toward a future. Now soaked in blood. And for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt angry. She stood tall, the rifle still warm in her grip. Elijah rose beside her. The porch was torn. The fence pocked with bullets. But Dustmere would hold, and Marigold was done waiting for someone else to claim the right to lead. "Tomorrow," she said, "we ride to town. We speak plain. Jesse's hold." "Breaks now," Elijah nodded. "I'll gather who we can." The night stretched long. They took turns watching the horizon. No one came, but a decision had come instead. No more warnings. No more messages passed with veiled threats. Dustmere would rise. Not just in defense, but in defiance. Dawn brought silence. Not the kind born of peace, but the stillness after a scream. The kind that made even the wind hold its breath. Marigold stepped out onto the porch, rifle slung over her shoulder, and scanned the fields for movement. Nothing. Yet, no hoofbeats, no dust trails. But that meant little now. After what had happened in the dark 2 nights before, she knew the next blow wouldn't come loud. It would come low, sudden, and sharp. Elijah emerged behind her, bandage wrapped tight under his shirt. His shoulder was healing, but slowly. She saw how he gritted his teeth when he moved too fast, saw the restraint in every gesture. "Rest," she said. He shook his head. "Can't afford it." Neither of them could. Inside the cabin, Granger lay in the cot near the stove, recovering from his bruises. Emmett Rowe had left at dawn, promising to spread word to those who would listen. Jesse hadn't struck back yet, not officially. But his absence from town meetings, from patrols, from any public view, was louder than a gunshot. Trouble was coming. No one said it aloud, but it was there in every look passed between neighbors, every store that opened a little late, every window shuttered too early. Marigold filled the water basin. "You think he'll come tonight?" Elijah didn't answer. He just picked up the axe and went to the woodpile. By midday, 2 men approached from the road, strangers. Marigold stood at the fence, fingers brushing her rifle stock. "Name's Finn," the taller one said. "Heard there's work to be done. Heard you folks are standing up to the wrong man." She raised an eyebrow. "You here to help or to warn?" He looked her straight in the eye. "Help. I buried a brother last winter. Jesse's tax killed our farm, took our horses, took everything but the will to fight." Elijah stepped up beside her. "You know how to use a shovel?" Finn smiled. "Better than I know how to talk." By sundown, the trench along the fence line was half dug, not for water. For defense. 3 more came that evening, then 5, families, old men, young girls carrying pots and dried meat. Not all armed, not all strong, but willing. The farm became a camp by nightfall. Lanterns flickered across the porch. Smoke curled from cook fires. And in every pair of eyes, Marigold saw it resolve. Not vengeance, not desperation, but a readiness she hadn't known people still had. She stood beside Elijah after supper, watching the children chase fireflies between the rows of corn. "I thought we'd have to fight alone," she whispered. "We still might," he said, "but not tonight." "No, not tonight." A shot rang out. The sound came from the north ridge. Men jumped to their feet. Women grabbed children. Elijah didn't speak, he ran. Marigold followed. They crested the hill to find smoke. A wagon burning. One of the newcomers, an older man named Jonas, lay in the dirt, clutching his leg. Blood soaked his trousers. They waited till I was alone, he gasped. Masked. 4 of them. Didn't say a word. Shot the horses and set the wagon on fire. Elijah crouched beside him, checked the wound. Through and through, you'll live. Can't say the same for my wheat. Marigold stared at the flames. This wasn't just a warning. No, Elijah said. It was bait. They want us to panic. They got Jonas back to the cabin. Granger took over, cleaning the wound. Marigold watched through the open window as Elijah stood alone by the dying fire. She joined him, arms crossed. He's getting bolder. He's getting scared, Elijah replied. Men like Jesse only lash out when they see their grip slipping. She looked at him. What happens when the grip breaks? He met her eyes. Then the fall starts. That night, no one slept. They took turns keeping watch. Elijah sat on the porch with Finn and Emmett, rifles on their laps. Marigold stayed by the barn, shotgun resting across her legs. The stars were cruelly beautiful bright and in different dot near midnight. Not many. 2, maybe 3. Finn leaned forward. You see it? Elijah raised the rifle. Wait. A horse came into view. No rider. Just the animal, limping, saddle torn. Behind it, nothing but dust. A message. A threat, or worse an omen. In the morning, someone would die. Marigold knew. Elijah knew it. And neither of them would wake to be next. At dawn, Elijah saddled his horse. Marigold stood by the gate. You know he's waiting for you to come. I'm counting on it. Don't go alone. I'm not. He nodded at the gathered crowd. At Finn, Emmett, Granger, limping but standing. Dozens more. Farmers, widows, former soldiers, merchants. All with tired hands and tired hearts and nothing left to fear. Marigold looked at him, voice low. You said you'd stay. You promised. Elijah touched her face, just briefly. Just enough. I'm not leaving. I'm walking forward. She nodded. And then she saddled her own horse. They rode toward town as the sun broke over the ridge, casting long shadows behind them. But for the first time, Dustmere's future didn't lie in those shadows. It rode in plain sight, side by side, toward the reckoning that could no longer be outrun. Dustmere had never known the weight of so many hooves. When Elijah and Marigold crested the bluff just south of the town square, the sound beneath them was steady, layered. The clink of tack, the low murmur of joined purpose, and the click of iron sliding into place. Not soldiers, not a militia, but something older than both people, with nothing left to surrender. The town was quieter than usual. No children in the dirt alleys. No shopkeepers at their doors. The buildings looked smaller. Somehow, as though Jesse Caulfield's grip had drawn the air from their walls. Elijah dismounted first. He didn't shout, didn't posture. He simply tied his reins, looked at the men and women behind him and said, No one fires unless I do. Marigold stepped beside him, shotgun at her hip. She knew the eyes watching from every window. Knew. They were deciding right now who to believe. Emmett Rowe walked to the front. You sure about this? I'm done being sure, Elijah said. Now I'm just ready. They moved in silence toward the jailhouse. The last place Jesse had been seen. Not hidden, not gone, just absent. Like a disease waiting for the body to grow weak. Outside the steps, 2 of Jesse's hired men sat in the shade. They stood as the group approached. One reached for his rifle. Elijah didn't stop walking. Don't. He said. Something in his voice, low, calm, heavy as iron, made the man freeze. We're not here for blood, Elijah said. But we won't turn from it if you force our hand. Marigold saw it, the doubt. The flicker of calculation behind the eyes of the man holding the rifle. Then slowly, both guards stepped aside. Elijah took the first step into the jailhouse. Jesse sat at his desk, one leg crossed, papers in hand. Calm as ever. You came, he said without looking up. I did. You brought a mob. I brought the town. Now Jesse looked at him. You think because you stirred up a few frightened people, you've won? I think they're tired of fearing you. Marigold stepped inside, and for the first time, Jesse's eyes flicked with something she hadn't seen in a long time, uncertainty. You could have left, he said. You could have stopped, Elijah replied. Jesse stood, slowly. So what now? You shoot me in front of them? Make me a martyr? I don't need to shoot you. Elijah walked to the window and opened it wide. I just need them to hear. Outside, the gathered crowd leaned in. Marigold stood in the doorway, ensuring. Every face could see. Elijah spoke. You took this town from its people. You taxed the poor, stole land, silenced voices. You punished honesty and rewarded fear. Jesse crossed his arms. You think your words matter? They matter now. Elijah turned. You lied to these people. Told them I was here to bring chaos. But I've brought nothing but the truth. And the truth is, you're nothing without your shadows. Without men to hide behind. Without threats to throw like stones. Jesse laughed. Is that it? You came to talk? No. Elijah stepped forward, slow and deliberate. I came to end it. You can step down, face trial, be judged by the people you've wronged, or you can draw your gun and die with nothing but your name. The room stilled. Jesse looked between them, at Elijah, at Marigold, at the faces gathering beyond. The threshold. He reached for his belt. Marigold's heart stopped. She raised her shotgun, but Jesse didn't draw a weapon. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Set it on the desk. A deed, he said. To the Vance property. Signed and cleared. Elijah stared. Jesse smiled, bitter. You want to win? Fine. But when you find yourself the man they turn on next, remember this. No one stays the hero forever. He walked out with his hands raised. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emmett stepped forward to meet him. Bound his wrists with a length of cord. You'll be tried. Emmett said. Jesse didn't answer. Marigold stepped into the sunlight. A hush followed. We're not here to replace one tyrant with another, she said. We're here to rebuild. That means fairness. That means voices. That means all of you. People nodded. Some wept. Some simply stared like they were waking from a long, terrible sleep. Elijah came beside her. His voice was quiet, but it carried. No more silence. That night, Dustmere lit up with lanterns. Not for mourning. For hope. Granger stood in the chapel and read the first of the new town charter drafts. Emmett took on temporary duty as marshal. A committee formed to handle Jesse's assets. All without blood. Without fire. Marigold sat on the church steps, watching the moon. Elijah sat beside her, hands raw from hours of work. You did it, she said. No, he replied. We did. She looked at him. Do you believe it'll last? I don't. No, but I know I'll fight for it. She leaned into him, just enough to share warmth. For the first time, he took her hand. Not out of duty, not out of desperation, but out of love, and this time he didn't let go. Morning came like breath after drowning. Dust. Mere stood not in triumph, but in quiet awareness. Not everything had healed. Scars didn't vanish overnight, but something had cracked open, and light, tentative and strange, had begun to seep in. Marigold watched as the townspeople swept dust from doorways. Children chased chickens across alleys, and for the first time in years, laughter returned without sounding suspicious. Elijah was already up, fixing the roof of the old meeting hall with Emmett. They'd worked until past midnight, setting order where there'd only been silence. Now his shirt was soaked through, and yet he climbed and hammered with the focus of someone carving permanence out of driftwood. She brought water. He didn't ask. Just took the cup, drank, and nodded his thanks. I keep thinking someone's going to undo all this, she said, voice low. They'll try, Elijah replied. But now they won't be doing it in the dark. Afterward, they walked the edge of town, passing homes newly patched, animals returned to pens, and people who met their gaze instead of looking away. Granger passed by with a satchel of letters. Sighed he was delivering notices for the first official. Council vote next week. Never thought I'd live long enough to deliver hope, he muttered. But here I am. Dustmere had its first sunrise in weeks without gunfire, or the fire, ELIGHT. But peace doesn't come without its price. By mid-afternoon. A rider appeared. Not from the west, where the sun baked the road soft, but from the northern ridge. He wore no badge, carried no flag. Just dust on his coat and a revolver strapped across his thigh. He rode slow, purposeful. Elijah stood by the well when he saw him. Marigold was kneeling near the porch, weeding the last of the flower bed. The man didn't shout, didn't posture. He simply dismounted in the center of town and looked around like someone measuring a space for a coffin. You Mercer? Elijah didn't flinch. I am. Then I'm here for you. Marigold froze, hands still in the soil. Her breath hitched. The man stepped forward. Name's Declan Rourke, Jesse's brother-in-law. Elijah stepped forward, slow. Didn't. No, Jesse had family worth sending. Most of us kept our distance. But blood's blood. You humiliated him. Had him jailed. You think that ends with town meetings and good intentions? It ends with justice. That's what's happening here now. Rourke looked around. This? He scoffed. This is hope on legs made of straw. You think you built something strong, but all you did was kick over a barrel. The snakes'll be back. They always are. What do you want? Marigold asked, voice sharp. I want what Jesse wanted, control. You can't have it, he smiled. Not yet, but I will. He turned to Elijah. You got 3 days to pack up and go. Take your cause. Leave Dustmere. If you're still here on the 4th morning, I'll burn everything that carries your name. Elijah's fists clenched. Marigold stepped forward. This town won't let you. He raised a brow. This town? They followed Jesse for years. They'll follow me. All I have to do is make them scared again. He mounted, tugged his reins. 3 days. He rode off with the calm of a man who believed the world owed him fear. Elijah didn't move. Marigold placed a hand on his arm. He whispered, It never ends. It does. When we stop running. They held a meeting that night. No official banners. No stage. Just hay bales around a fire. Granger spoke first, then Emmett, then Elijah. This is where we make the choice, Elijah told them. We don't get to erase the past. But we choose how it shapes us. Jesse's gone. But what he stood for, what men like Declan Rourke carry with them, that's still here. If we leave now, they win again. If we stay, we risk everything. But we plant something that might just survive. No one shouted, but slowly, heads nodded. Widow Hallie stood. You stood for us. We'll stand for you. Even old Walt Jenkins, who'd sworn off any fight since the war, raised his cane and said, Tired of handing over my peace like rent. That night they planned. They reinforced homes. Built signal fires on the ridge. Posted watches. Armed who they could and fortified who they couldn't. And all the while, Marigold moved among them like a storm contained. She sharpened tools, boiled cloth, marked supply routes. But inside the storm brewed. She found Elijah sitting by the broken fence, sharpening a blade that looked older than both of them. You ready? She asked. No, he said. But I'm staying anyway. She sat beside him. The silence stretched. Then softly, I used to dream of someone who'd protect me. Then I became her instead. He looked at her, eyes soft. And now? She leaned her head against his shoulder. Now I dream of a place where I don't have to protect anything, just build, then we fight for that. And in the quiet, with the stars above and Dustmere sleeping behind them, they sharpened hope like steel. The first night passed without incident, but in the distance, far across the hills, a line of torches flickered into view. Not many, but more than a threat, a promise, and the storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. The first torch wasn't lit by Dustmir's hands. It came from the north ridge at twilight, flickering high like a match struck against the sky. Not a signal, an omen. Declan Rourke's promise had teeth, and now it bared them. Marigold stood by the old bell tower, watching the fire curl and lean into the dark. Her fingers tightened around the worn iron of her rifle. She didn't blink, didn't speak. Behind her, Elijah climbed the last rungs of the ladder, breath steady. 3 nights early, he said. They want us shaken, rushed. He stood beside her. It won't work. But even as he said it, the ground beneath them seemed to hum. The kind of tension that builds just before something breaks. By morning, rumors had already spread. 2 farms just outside the valley, no deaths but plenty of fear. Cattle scattered, crops salted. The council gathered in the chapel. Granger, Emmett, Widow Hallie, Elijah, Marigold, and 2 farmers who still smelled of smoke. They sat around the altar like it was a war table. They'll strike in waves, said Emmett. They're testing our edges. We hold the center, Marigold said. If they burn the outskirts, they want us pulled thin. Granger leaned in. And we don't split. We gather, tighten the ring. Widow Hallie snorted. What's left to tighten? We've got 10 shooters, 5 hands with farm tools, and a handful of widows who bake better than they aim. We have each other, Elijah said. They didn't laugh. But they didn't argue either. That night, Marigold patrolled the fields with her lantern low. Every creak of grass sounded like boots. Every flicker of breeze bent her breath into silence. And still nothing. The enemy wasn't rushing. They were watching. On the second day, word came that Rourke had camped just past Shepherd's Hill with at least 20 men. Some of them ex-bandits, some from Jesse's old ranks. One of them, a woman named Lydia Trent, had once run a saloon with knives behind the bottles. They weren't an army, but they were worse in some ways, desperate, and convinced of their own power. The council debated a preemptive strike. Go out there, Emmett said. Burn their supplies before they burn ours. They want us out there, Elijah replied. They want us far from the people we're trying to protect. Marigold agreed. We stay. We fortify. And when they come, we don't move until we've buried the last of them or the last of us. No one disagreed. But that night, the saloon went dark. Finn found the barkeep tied to a chair, beaten but alive. Scrawled in ash on the wall behind him, 3 more nights. Marigold sat on the porch of the meeting hall, oil lamp flickering. Elijah passed her a bowl of stew. She didn't touch it. You need to eat, he said. I need to feel something first. He sat beside her. You scared? She nodded. Me too. And that admission, fragile as it was, made her shoulders drop. Just a little. They kissed for the first time that night. No ceremony. No sweeping gestures. Just a touch of warmth in the middle of something cold. 3 more torches appeared the next evening. And then came the rider. A boy no older than 16. Blood on his sleeve. Horse lathered. He collapsed at the chapel steps. North Field, he gasped. There. Already there. They're burning the stables. Dustmere rose like one body. Emmett rang the bell until the rope snapped. Marigold and Elijah took 25 into the dark. Most were on foot. All were angry. When they reached the ridge, the smell was thick wood smoke and gunpowder. Flames ate through the barn, and in its silhouette stood Lydia Trent. She laughed when she saw them. You made it quicker than I thought. Marigold stepped forward. You won't laugh long. Oh, I ain't laughing. I'm remembering. This place used to belong to the meanest man west of the river. Now it belongs to a preacher's ghost and a woman with dirt under her nails. We're still standing, Elijah said. Not for long. Gunfire ripped the night. Dustmir's fighters scattered, ducked, returned fire. Marigold dropped behind a cart, aimed, fired, took one of Lydia's men in the knee. Elijah rushed to the right, circling wide, drawing two enemies away. Screams, wood cracking. Horses panicked. The barn collapsed, sparks leaping into the sky. Granger took a hit to the shoulder. Finn dragged into safety. Lydia stepped through the smoke, shotgun raised. Marigold rose to meet her. "You're not walking out of here," Marigold said. Lydia grinned. "Neither are you." They fired at the same time. Lydia missed. Marigold didn't. The woman dropped. Hard. Silence followed. Then the clatter of boots. Rourke's men retreating, some dragging wounded, others gone entirely. Emmett stood over the ridge. "They're running." "Let them," Elijah said, helping Granger up. The cost was clear. 3 dead, 6 wounded, but the field held. Dustmir held. Back in town, they didn't ring bells. They sat together, passed bread, tended wounds, read names aloud. Marigold stood outside the chapel after midnight. Elijah joined her. "Do you think he'll stop?" she asked. "No, not until he breaks, or we do." She looked up at the stars. "Then we keep standing." And they did. Side by side, again. The sun rose on Dustmir like it had something to prove. Clouds hung low over the hills, orange light breaking through their edges like fire-cracking porcelain. The smoke from the burned barn still lingered, curling along fences and catching in the windowsills. But beneath the haze, life moved. Children carried buckets of water to clean the chapel steps. Widow Hallie swept ash from the schoolhouse door. And Marigold stood at the cemetery fence, boots planted, breath cold. 3 graves. 3 markers, names carved by knife, not chisel, no sermons. Just dirt, sorrow, and silence. Elijah joined her. His coat smelled of pine and soot. He said nothing. "They weren't soldiers," she whispered. "They were more." He placed a hand on her back. The gesture wasn't comfort. It was presence. Behind them, the town built. Barricades at the road's edge. Extra nails hammered into windowsills. The schoolhouse repurposed as triage. Granger's arm hung in a sling. But he barked orders with the fire of a man half his age. Every hour, someone asked the same question. "When's Rourke coming?" And every time, the answer remained, "Soon." By the 3rd night, the stars had vanished behind thick cloud. The moon, barely a smudge. Dustmir moved in shadows, lit only by lanterns buried behind curtains. Then just past midnight, the dogs barked. It wasn't wild. It wasn't panic. It was rhythm warning. Rourke had arrived. This time, there was no fanfare, no torch. Just shapes moving low through the brush. A dozen or more. Too spread to be one wave. Too tight to scatter. Elijah stood at the barricade, rifle slung, jaw tight. Emmett took the left flank. Marigold knelt behind the broken wagon. They'd converted into cover. She could hear the steps before she saw them. Then a voice cut the air. Elijah Mercer. It was Rourke. "I said you had 3 days." "You got your answer," Elijah shouted back. "Then here's mine." Gunfire erupted. Bullets cracked against the barricade. Splinters flew. Dustmir returned fire. Controlled. Sharp. Marigold picked her marks, breathing in time with the muzzle. She dropped 1, 2, maybe 3. Rourke's men surged, but the barricades held, for now. A wagon caught fire. Flames licked the sky. Shadows danced across the field. Rourke strode into view, revolver in each hand. "You think you've made something here?" he shouted. "You think this town's rebirth is more than a dream?" He fired 3 shots. One grazed a post. One took down a lantern. The third hit the chapel bell. The sound rang sharp clear. As if the town itself had screamed. Elijah stood tall. "We've made more than you ever could." Then he jumped the barricade. Marigold's breath caught. Elijah. But he was already running. zigzagging through smoke, rifle in hand. He reached the hill where Rourke stood and tackled him to the dirt. They rolled. Punches flew. Guns CLETTERED. Marigold bolted after him. Behind her, Emmett and the others surged forward, pushing Rourke's gang back in a wave of fury. Elijah and Rourke wrestled in the dirt. Blood smeared both mouths. Rourke drove a knee into Elijah's ribs. Elijah swung back, caught his jaw. Marigold didn't shout. She raised her rifle, but Rourke saw her first. He rolled, grabbed Elijah, dragged him up as a shield. "Drop it!" Rourke roared. Marigold froze. "Drop it or he dies." Elijah gasped. "Don't you dare!" Rourke laughed. "Look at you, building something worth losing." Marigold's finger trembled, then a crack, a single shot. Rourke's eyes widened. He staggered. Looked down. A small red bloom spread across his gut. Behind him, Widow Hallie stood with an old flintlock, smoke rising. "Leave our boy alone." Rourke dropped. Elijah collapsed to his knees. Marigold ran to him, pulled him back, checked the wound. Just bruises. No blood. The rest of Rourke's men scattered like leaves. Dustmere didn't cheer, didn't shout. They just exhaled. Back in town, the fires were put out, wounds cleaned, dead counted. Only one this time. Marigold sat beside Elijah on the chapel steps. His head rested on her shoulder. "You jumped the barricade," she said. "Didn't like the view. You're an idiot." He smiled. The next morning, they buried Rourke at the edge of the ridge. Not in consecrated ground, but not left to rot either, because Dustmere, even broken, held on to dignity. In hope, the town voted again, not on defense. On future, Marigold was named chair of the council. Elijah declined the title. "I just want to build," he said. He built a schoolhouse porch, a new bell tower, a garden. And at night, they sat together under the stars and talked about tomorrow like it was already here. Because maybe, in Dustmere, it finally was. The morning after the barn burned, Dustmere woke to wind. Not the soft whisper kind, but the sort that pushed hard against doors and scattered dust through every crack in the wood. It howled across rooftops and bent the wheat like it was bowing. To something unseen. Marigold didn't sleep. Neither did Elijah. They stood on the porch of the meeting hall as the sky turned steel gray, wordless, listening. "You think they'll come again today?" she asked. "They didn't lose enough to quit," Elijah said. "But they lost enough to bleed." He turned to her, eyes heavy. "They'll come angry, then we meet them calm." The council gathered before breakfast. Granger's arm hung from a makeshift sling. Widow Hallie clutched a journal full of handwritten names. Emmett limped on a bandaged leg, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "They'll come through the west side next," Emmett said. "We saw Lydia's crew scouting there last week." "It's our weakest barricade," Hallie added. "We reinforce it now," Marigold said. "Not later, not tomorrow, now." Elijah turned to the group. "And we move the infirm to the chapel basement. If it turns, we won't be able to keep them safe out here." No one argued. Dustmere moved like a single lung. Boards hammered. Cartwheels turned. Children were sent to the root cellar, the strongest men to the wall. The women refused to sit idle. Widow Hallie handed out pistols she'd kept since her husband died in Kansas. Granger's wife set up a triage station behind the blacksmith's. Marigold wrapped her hands in cloth. Not for protection, for grip. That afternoon, Elijah found her stacking crates outside the saloon. "Granger says you haven't eaten since yesterday." Granger also once said he could outrun a coyote. He limped for 2 weeks after. Elijah didn't smile. He just sat beside her, passed her a strip of dried meat and an apple. "I can't do this without you," he said. "You won't have to." Night fell hard. The wind died, and with it, the noise. Dustmere grew still. No laughter, no music. Just the creak of shutters and the nervous clatter of spoons against tin bowls. Then, as if summoned by that silence, hooves. Dozens. Not rushing, not galloping. A slow, deliberate pace that filled the night like a funeral drum. Marigold looked to Elijah. He nodded once. She moved to the line. They came from the west. Just as Emmett predicted, lanterns swinging from saddles, rifles resting. Across thighs, faces hard, faces young, faces blank. Rourke wasn't among them, but his second in command was a man named Cross. Broad shoulders, cold eyes. He rode with his coat open, revealing a crimson sash across his chest like a badge of honor. "You've had your victories," he called. "We're here for the end." Emmett stepped forward. "You've had yours too. We're still standing. You won't be tomorrow." Cross raised a hand. His men fanned out. They outnumbered Dustmere 3-1, but the town didn't flinch. Marigold steadied her breathing. "Fire if fired upon," Elijah said. "Nothing before." Then Cross smiled. He drew his pistol and aimed it at a lantern hanging from the saloon. One shot. Flame spilled. Wood caught, and the street erupted. Gunfire exploded from both sides. Marigold ducked behind crates, returned fire. Elijah moved fast, flanking with 3 others toward the back of the stable. Emmett went down with a shoulder wound. Hallie dragged him out of the line. Granger shouted from the barricade, reloading faster than his age should allow. Smoke thickened. Screams mixed with the thunder of hooves. Cross charged the center line. Marigold met him head-on. He dismounted, firing blindly, confident in chaos. She fired once, missed. Fired again, hit his leg. He stumbled, but he kept coming. She ducked a swing, slammed the butt of her rifle into his ribs. He groaned, punched her across the face. Her vision blurred. She fell. Elijah appeared behind him, tackled him to the ground. The 2 men struggled. Dirt flew. Blood spilled. But Elijah was stronger. He pinned Cross, raised his fist, and stopped. He looked up. Cross's men were breaking, running, retreating into the dark. They had lost. Again. Cross groaned beneath him. "Kill me," he spat, "or I'll come back." Elijah stood. "Then come back and see what happens." Marigold stood, bruised but upright. "You think fear is loyalty. It's not." They left Cross there, took his weapons, bound his hands, let him limp into the dark with the rest of his shame. Dustmere stood. They buried 2 that night. Lit candles at each door. The children were brought out from the cellar. Bread shared. Tears allowed. Elijah and Marigold sat outside the chapel. "No word from Rourke," she said. "He'll be last," Elijah replied. "Or he won't come at all." They sat in silence. Then she reached out, took his hand. "I don't want to fight forever. You won't have to." And in the dark, with the wind picking back up, they both believed it, if only for a moment. It started with a sound, a soft creak like the hinge of a door pushed open by wind. Marigold heard it in her sleep. Not in a dream, but in that liminal edge where the body is still and the mind stirs. She sat upright, hand instinctively reaching for the rifle beside her bed. Elijah stirred too, eyes groggy but alert. "You hear that?" She nodded. Another creak. Then the faint scuff of boot against wood. She was already moving, wrapping her coat over her nightdress, the barrel of her rifle, leading the way as she stepped onto the porch. Dustmere slept. Still, silent, worn thin from the last fight. The chapel's bell tower swayed gently in the breeze, as if watching. Marigold squinted into the dark. Then she saw him, a figure standing near the edge of town just past the old well. Tall, broad-shouldered. A wide-brim hat pulled low. Rourke. No weapon drawn. No men behind him. Just him, alone. Elijah stepped beside her, eyes narrowing. "He's baiting us. Then we make the hook ours." They moved as one. Marigold from the right, Elijah from the Left, rifles at the ready. Rourke didn't flinch. He looked older, thinner. Eyes sunken like sleep had long betrayed him. But his voice, when he spoke, still carried power. "I didn't come to fight." "You set this all in motion," Marigold replied, rifle aimed at his chest. "I did, and I lost." He spread his arms. "So now I give you this." He dropped something onto the dirt. A pouch, small, leather. Elijah picked it up cautiously. Inside letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to men and women from the outlaw camp. Orders, bribes, threats. Proof. Double quotes. "This ends with me," Rourke said. "You've earned your peace. Let them go." "You could have done this weeks ago," Marigold said. "I could have. But I was proud." "And now?" Elijah asked. "Now I'm tired." He stepped back once, twice, then turned. "Don't follow me. You've already won." He walked into the dark. Neither of them moved. Dustmere awoke to news of the encounter with hushed awe. Rourke's retreat sparked debates. Was it a trick, a surrender, or something in between? Granger leaned toward caution. Hallie leaned toward relief. Marigold leaned toward rebuilding. The days passed without a single shot fired. No scouts. No smoke on the hills. Just the sound of hammer and nail. Elijah built a new porch on the schoolhouse. Marigold replanted the community garden. Children played in the street again. Parents laughed quietly, like testing joy for the first time. One morning, Hallie hung a white sheet from the chapel steeple. "Peace," she said, "if only borrowed." A week later, the council voted to rename the Valley Road Rourke's Run, not to honor him. To remember what it cost. At dusk, Marigold stood alone on the ridge. The wind moved gently through her hair. Below her, Dustmere glowed with firelight. Safe, steady. Elijah joined her, hands tucked in his coat. No words. He didn't need them. They stood there until the stars opened wide. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "All the time. And," he smiled, "I think I want to ask you something." She turned. Now? Now feels good." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring, simple silver, shaped like a nail bent into a circle. "I made it," he said. "Not perfect, but strong." She didn't cry. She laughed. And said yes. The wedding wasn't grand. It wasn't even big, but it was Dustmere. Hallie officiated. Granger wept openly. Children threw dry leaves like confetti. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought cider. And for one night, the town sang. They danced under strings of lanterns hung between buildings. The fire pit burned steady. Laughter echoed against the hills. Elijah held Marigold close as they swayed. "You think he's really gone?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I think he's done." They didn't talk about war that night, or ghosts, or scars. Just dreams. Proper schoolhouse. A library. A fence around the garden. And each other. Dustmere never forgot its fight, but it didn't stay there. It built. It loved. It lived. And in the quiet after all the storms, that was enough. Dustmere's peace lasted longer than anyone dared to hope. The weeks turned to months, and the soil softened beneath spring rain. Seeds took root where blood once spilled. The schoolhouse bell rang each morning, a soft, hopeful chime that reminded everyone of where they'd been and how far they'd come. Marigold moved through the days with sleeves rolled high and hands full of dirt, notes, or nails. She never stayed idle. If she wasn't tending the garden, she was at the council hall, organizing trade, checking inventory, teaching letters to the children, or holding open a broken gate with her hip while hammering it steady. Elijah stayed close. He repaired roofs, built fences, and sanded wood until his hands cracked. The ring he wore, shaped like the one he'd given her, caught the light. Whenever he raised his hand to shade his eyes, they didn't speak of war anymore. But sometimes, when the wind came from the north, Marigold would stop mid-sentence and glance toward the hills. It wasn't fear, it was memory. One morning, She opened the town ledger and found a letter slipped between the pages. No name, no signature. Just a line, "He's not done." The paper smelled of tobacco and river water. She folded it slowly and placed it in the drawer. Didn't tell Elijah. Not yet. Instead, she redoubled her efforts. Started plans for a grain mill by the creek. Convinced the council to extend Dustmere's perimeter 200 yards outward. Pushed for scouts to check the ridge every third day. Elijah noticed. "You don't sleep when I do," he said one night. "I've been dreaming while awake," she replied. He sat beside her at the window. "Want to tell me what you saw?" She hesitated. "Someone's watching. Or wants us to think they are." Elijah didn't flinch. He reached for her hand. "Then we stay ready, but we don't retreat into fear." She nodded. The next day, scouts reported signs of a camp 2 miles out, smoke trails, canteen straps, a torn glove. No footprints near. No one brave enough to step inside Dustmere. That night, the town voted again. Not out of panic, out of prudence. Marigold proposed a WATCHTOWER. The vote was unanimous. Work began the next morning. Elijah led the crew, carving a base from stacked stone and hauling lumber up the ridge. Granger, despite his bad shoulder, insisted on laying the foundation. Even Hallie brought soup and bread, standing watch as the platform took shape. By week's end, the tower stood 20 feet high, solid, with a bell at the top and a telescope mounted to a pivot arm. It could see half the valley, maybe more on a clear day. From its peak, Marigold watched the sun set, watched the river split the forest like a ribbon, watched the wind comb the wheat field like a hand smoothing a blanket. No fires, no riders. Just quiet. But she knew better. That night, Elijah found her staring at the stars. "Do you believe in luck?" she asked. "No," he said. "I believe in decisions. I made a lot of bad ones before Dustmere. We all did." She looked at him. "Would you leave this place if it meant something better?" "No," he said. "Because better isn't a place, it's what we've made." She smiled, but didn't relax. The next morning, they woke to find the northern field torn, not scorched, not trampled, sliced, neatly, row by row, a warning. Marigold called the council at dawn. "This is deliberate," she said. "He's testing our reach." "Then we show him," Elijah said. They sent 3 scouts, armed but light-footed. They returned by nightfall. "Tracks," one said. 5 men, maybe 6, light prints. "No horses. Supplies?" "Barely. Traveling lean." Marigold stepped away from the group and stared toward the north. "He wants us to strike first." Hallie nodded. "And paint ourselves as aggressors." Elijah exhaled. "So we stay the course." They posted sentries in shifts, doubled the watchtower hours, posted signs at the edge of the wheat field. "Dustmere is not prey." Nothing happened for days. Then a note appeared on the chapel door, pinned with a thorn. "When blood rises again, will you spill it wisely?" No signature. No prints. No dust disturbed. Marigold gathered the town. Held the note up. "We are being provoked," she said. "But our power lies in choosing when, not if we answer." Dustmere listened. Children stopped playing outside the fence. Elders walked in pairs. Fires burned low. Voices stayed hushed, but hearts didn't falter, because now they had each other and a future worth protecting. Elijah climbed the tower that night and stayed until dawn. He watched the hills, the river. The empty road. And whispered into the wind, "We're still here." The quiet didn't last. It began with footprints. Small, deliberate ones found near the northern fence line by Hallie's boy while collecting wild herbs. They ran parallel to the creek, then vanished. No broken twigs, no drag marks. Just the kind of tracks left by someone who knew how to disappear. Marigold examined them herself. Squatted low in the dirt, tracing the edge with her thumb. "Fresh," she muttered. Within hours. Elijah stood behind her. They're testing our routine, learning our blind spots. That night, they moved the sentry rotation again. No one stood watch in the same hour as the night before. Every lantern lit at sundown was doused at a different minute. Dustmere adapted. Quietly, deliberately. 2 days later, the creek dam was breached. The grain mill they'd just begun to build washed downstream before the frame could be set. The crew found fresh axe marks on the dam timbers. Not weathered breaks, cuts, clean and sharp. This time Elijah didn't hesitate. We scout the hills, all of them. I want 3 lookouts north and east by sunrise. He left no room for vote, even. Hallie didn't argue. Dustmere watched its children more closely now. No one walked alone. The tower was manned day and night. Marigold kept a map nailed to the inside of the meeting hall door, adding colored pins for every disturbance. The pins multiplied. Boot prints near the orchard. A scarecrow torn apart in the wheat. Rocks piled in strange patterns outside the chapel gate. Each act minor, symbolic, like someone was drawing. Circles around them. Then the fire came. A torch hurled from the ridge in the middle of the night. It landed in the outer wheat rows. Flames lit dry stalks like kindling. The bell rang before the blaze could spread, and half the town formed a bucket line from the well to the edge of the field. By dawn, the fire was out, but the warning was clear. Marigold gathered the council and the people. She stepped onto the chapel steps. I know you're tired, she said. I know your backs ache and your hands bleed. But this land, this town, it was born of your strength. We don't give it away. Not to shadows, not to threats. The people didn't cheer. They nodded. That night, Elijah set tripwires strung, with bells along the northern ridge. Granger sharpened every tool in the forge. Hallie collected the children's chalk drawings from the chapel floor and stored them in her chest. The next disturbance came quietly. Just after midnight, a bell on the ridge jingled once. Then silence. Elijah reached the spot in minutes. Lantern swinging. Nothing. No prints. No broken line. Only the bell. Still swaying, he walked a little further, found a piece of cloth. Torn. Caught on a thorn bush. He brought it back. Marigold turned it over in her hands, dark red. Not from blood. From dye. I know this fabric, she said. It was from a caravan that had passed through Dustmere half a year ago. Traders. They'd sold silks, spices and stories. I remember the woman who wore this, Hallie said. She had a scar down her cheek. Didn't speak much. Marigold's stomach turned. This wasn't just a new threat. It was someone who'd walked their streets, shared their food. Seen their defenses. Elijah paced. And this isn't a raid. It's infiltration. They read through the patrol paths. Divided the town into sectors. Marigold started sleeping in her boots. The days grew longer, hotter. The wheat fields recovered slowly, but the burn scars were visible. Dustmere's children painted over them with ash and water, turning them into swirling murals of wolves and mountains. But the people didn't smile as easily. Not yet. Then, one morning, the tower bell rang 3 times. The signal. Someone was coming. Elijah climbed the ladder 2 steps at a time. He reached the top and raised the telescope. One rider. Alone. Approaching from the south. Direction no one had touched in months. He wore a long coat, a wide-brimmed hat. Not Rourke. Younger, clean-shaven. A scar across his jaw. Behind him, tied to his saddle, was a second horse with a bound rider. Marigold met Elijah at the gate. What'd we do? He asked. Open it, she said. But keep a lying ready. The gate creaked wide. The rider stopped 10 paces in. I come alone, he called. My name is Danner. The man tied to my horse tried to set fire to your southern ridge. I stopped him. He dismounted slowly, loosened the ropes. Second man collapsed to the dirt. Coffin. Burn marks across his arms. Soot caked in his beard. Hallie rushed forward with water. Granger stood behind her with a pistol drawn. Danner raised both hands. I'm not part of whatever war you're still fighting. I'm tired of it too. Why help us? Marigold asked. Danner looked her in the eye. Because I rode with Rourke. And I left because he stopped fighting for survival and started fighting to win. A silence settled, not distrust. Something deeper. Recognition. Double quotes. Then help us end it, Elijah said. Danner. The quiet didn't last. It began with footprints. Small, deliberate ones found near the northern fence line by Hallie's boy while collecting wild herbs. They ran parallel to the creek, then vanished. No broken twigs, no drag marks. Just the kind of tracks left by someone who knew how to disappear. Marigold examined them herself. Squatted low in the dirt, tracing the edge with her thumb. Fresh, she muttered. Within hours. Elijah stood behind her. They're testing our routine, learning our blind spots. That night, they moved the sentry rotation again. No one stood watch in the same hour as the night before. Every lantern lit at sundown was doused at a different minute. Dustmere adapted. Quietly, deliberately. 2 days later, the creek dam was breached. The grain mill they'd just begun to build washed downstream before the frame could be set. Dustmere moved with a different rhythm now. Each breath the town took was slower, measured, coiled like a spring. The fields were tilled in silence. Meals were eaten under watchful eyes. The children were taught not just their letters, but what to do when the bell rang more than twice. The plan spread across the council. Table grew thicker by the hour. Defensive positions, fallback routes, rally points. Marigold barely slept. Neither did Elijah. Danner, for all his past, proved loyal. He knew where to listen, how to disappear, and when to return. He warned them of a new drop point near the river fork, where Rourke's scouts left messages in hollowed stones. Elijah sent 2 volunteers to intercept the next one. They returned with a scrap of parchment. Dustmere will bend or Dustmere will burn. Marigold read it aloud. No one flinched. That evening she addressed the town again. We don't bend, not for tyrants, not for ghosts, and if they try to burn us, we'll rise from the ash. The blacksmith, an old man named Greaves, nodded once. I'll double the forge fires. A woman named Leela brought forward her family's old rifles. Cleaned and oiled. Even the children helped carving signal marks and defense posts and stringing warning bells beneath the floorboards. Dustmere didn't wait. It fortified. But what they didn't see coming was the wind. The southern wind shifted abruptly one morning, carrying smoke before any fire had been lit. Thick, dark, sour-smelling. Not from wheat or brush. This was oil, tar. Deliberate. Scouts returned breathless. 5 fires set downwind. East and south quadrants. No sparks inside yet, but if the wind changes again, then we light back, Elijah said. Marigold stopped him. No, that's their trap. They want panic. She turned to Danner. Where's the oil coming from? Valley Basin, he said. They've stored barrels underground. I saw the site once. 20, maybe 30 drums. Could you take them out? Danner hesitated. With help. Marigold looked to the map, pointed. You leave tonight. Take Greaves' son and Leela's cousin. Quiet. You strike before dawn. They nodded. That night, while the town stayed alert, 3 shadows slipped into the dark. At first light, the sky bloomed orange. Not from Dustmere, but from the Valley Basin. The fire was theirs. The barrels destroyed. The smoke a message. Rourke's options were thinning, but his fury was not. He sent riders the next night, 4 of them, fast and hard. They didn't stop at the gate. They didn't speak. They threw something into the center of town and wheeled away before the bells even rang. It landed with a thud. A sack. Inside 12 bound notes, each addressed to a member of Dustmere's council. Each note the same. You have 1 more week. After that, I take everything. Granger crushed his in his hand. Elijah burned his. Hallie buried hers under the chapel. Marigold didn't open hers. She simply stared at it. And walked away. The next day, she rode north. Alone. She didn't tell Elijah. Didn't ask for permission. She needed to see it. The camp. The heart of the threat. She followed the smoke trails, then the scent of burned oil. Past the valley basin and through a shallow grove. Her horse grew restless, ears flicking, hooves pausing. Then she saw it, the encampment. Not large, but well organized, rows of canvas, weapons glinting in the sun. And in the center, a tall man standing over a map spread across a table. Rourke. He hadn't aged, not like the others. He looked leaner, meaner. But whole. Marigold watched from the tree line. He didn't glance her way, but his voice carried. They'll break. The fire didn't do it, but the hunger will. Block the creek next. Let their fields dry. She turned back, didn't run, but didn't wait. That night, she met the council. He's cutting water next. We need reserves. We need wells. And we need to guard the stream itself. Plans shifted. Guards were posted at the creek mouth. A new well was dug behind the chapel. Rain barrels lined rooftops. Rourke's next move came 2 days later. Men in stolen clothes. Impersonators. They walked right up to the outer fields pretending to be traders. Had names, stories. One even carried a Dustmere ledger stolen months ago. But Greaves' wife spotted the mistake. The man claimed he'd traded with her father. Her father had died 3 years before. The alarm rang. 3 infiltrators captured. 1 fled. 1 fought. 1 spoke. I was promised land, he said. Promised family. Rourke said Dustmere was his. Marigold stood over him. Dustmere belongs to no one. It belongs to all of us. He looked away. They kept him locked inside the chapel storehouse. Fed him, let him right home. That was their difference. They didn't torture. They endured. The final week approached. The council met daily, eyes sunken, voices dry. No one suggested surrender. No one even whispered it. Elijah found Marigold one evening staring at the field again. You rode alone, he said. I had to see him, to know if he was bluffing, and he's not. They stood together. No fear, only readiness and love. Dustmere was ready. Dawn came hard and colorless, the kind of morning that didn't warm, didn't whisper, didn't promise anything good. Just gray light and dry wind that kicked the dust in tight little circles. Marigold stood in the doorway of the house she and Elijah had nearly died defending. Her boots were muddy, her eyes sharper than ever. In the yard, Elijah loaded their wagon, rifles, supplies, a folded canvas banner. Not for show, but because symbols mattered. Especially when men like Jesse pretended they spoke for everyone. He didn't. Not anymore. Granger arrived with a bandage still visible under his collar. Emmett, too, carrying 2 crates of fresh iron tools for the blacksmith shop in town. A quiet message. Dustmere didn't come to burn. It came to rebuild. By the time they reached the town's edge, 10 riders had joined them. Some from neighboring farms, some from the mountains. One, a widow from the creek bend, rode alone with a rifle across her lap and fire behind her eyes. Marigold led them. Not with a speech. Just a nod. Just her presence. The town square was quiet when they entered. Shops shuttered, windows dark. But people watched from alleys, from rooftops, from behind cracked doors. They saw Dustmere, and they listened. Marigold dismounted, stepped into the middle of the street, and waited. Jesse came out of the saloon like he owned it. Hat low, gun on his hip. Smile too wide. He clapped slowly. Well now, look who found her backbone. Marigold didn't blink. We're not here to trade words. Jesse walked a slow circle around her. Then what? You come to scare me? You brought farmers and preachers to my town. It's not your town. Jesse stopped. You think just 'cause you survived a few raids you get to draw lines? I think surviving gives me the right to speak, but building gives me the right to lead. The wind stirred. Behind her, Elijah stepped forward. We're not here to beg or to bow. Granger spoke next. We came because we're done living under someone else's fear. A murmur rippled through the square. Doors creaked. Someone stepped out of the bakery, then another from the old stable. Jesse laughed. You think this changes anything? Marigold held up a scroll signed by every household in Dustmere and beyond. We formed a council, a real one. Representation. From every corner of the valley. Starting today, decisions won't come from threats. They'll come from votes. Jesse's face shifted. Smile gone. You trying to strip me of my station? You never earned one. He reached for his belt. Faster than anyone expected, Elijah stepped forward, rifle raised, not aimed. Just firm. You pull iron today, he said, and you won't get to speak again. Jesse paused, then lowered his hand. You'll regret this, he spat. No, Marigold said. We'll remember it. He turned, stormed back into the saloon. The door slammed, but the people didn't follow him. They stepped closer to Marigold, one by one. Quiet nods. Quiet voices. What now? Someone asked. She looked around. We fixed the broken windows. We reopened the shops. We share seed and labor until every farm stands again. And we make sure no voice gets buried. A girl tugged her sleeve. And what if Jesse comes back with guns? Marigold knelt. Then we'll meet him with truth. And if that fails, she stood again, eyes hard, then we meet him with everything else we have. Later that day, Dustmere's people returned home, but the council remained. In the chapel. They gathered Marigold, Elijah, Granger, Hallie, Emmett, and two new faces. Rosa from the Southern Ridge and Tom, the stonemason's son. They drafted the first charter, equal voice. Shared water rights. Rotating leadership. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And that night, in the lantern light of Dustmere's little chapel, the first real government of the valley was born. Jesse didn't show himself for days, but the saloon windows stayed dark, and as riders scattered, peace came slowly. Like a cautious guest, the children played again, crops were planted, even the wheat returned taller and stronger in places where fire had once devoured everything. But no one forgot, because peace, Marigold learned, wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward despite it. And so, Dustmere walked forward, step by dusty step, ready for what came next. Together. Under the gray light of morning, the people of Dustmere gathered. Marigold stood in the chapel square, dust still clinging to her boots from the night's watch. Elijah was beside her, his shoulder bandaged, but the wound hadn't slowed him. Hallie had rung the chapel bell twice to summon the town, and by sunrise, the space was full. Men with shovels still slung over their shoulders, women with aprons dusted in flour, and children peeking out from behind legs, wide-eyed and hushed. Marigold stepped forward. Last night wasn't a warning, it was a message. Jesse thinks we're too scattered to stand, too broken to fight back. He's wrong. We're not asking him to back down anymore. We're demanding it. A murmur moved through the crowd, soft but steady. She raised her hand. We ride in 2 hours. Not as a mob, not to start a war, but to show Dustmere isn't his to bully. This is our home, and we decide its future. Granger stepped forward first, still wincing as he walked. I can't lift a rifle today, but I'll be there, standing. Hallie nodded. We all will. They broke into groups, some to ready the wagons, others to reinforce the town perimeter. Elijah pulled Emmett aside to go over fallback signals. No one moved without purpose. Marigold returned home briefly to pack the last of her supplies. She checked the rifles, kissed Elijah's temple, and slipped her mother's ring into her coat pocket. By mid-morning, 32 people rode from Dustmere. They moved as one, silent, tight, purposeful. The road to town stretched flat and dry, and the sun climbed fast. Marigold led, coat snapping in the wind. Elijah flanked her right. Danner rode rearguard with 2 others. Even the children left behind knew this was not a protest. It was a reckoning. As they approached the town center, shop doors slammed shut. Curtains twitched. The saloon's front porch emptied. Jesse's men waited in front of the general store, 6 of them, rifles in hand, leaning like they weren't already nervous. Jesse himself stepped through the swinging doors of the sheriff's office, wearing a tailored vest and a calm smile. He clapped slowly. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you'd be holed up with bandages and fear." Marigold dismounted. The rest followed. She stepped into the square. Dustmere gathered behind her. "You sent men in the night. They died. Yours, not ours. This ends now." Jesse's smile widened. "I didn't send anyone. You know how the plains are: bandits, raiders, misfortune. Don't blame me for what the wild brings." "Then why are you shaking?" Elijah asked. Jesse's hand twitched near his belt. Marigold ignored it. "You've ruled by fear, Jesse. Threats, payments, lies, but you never expected a town to say no. We say it now, out loud, for all to hear. Dustmere is not yours." He laughed, one sharp bark. "You think this gathering scares me? You've got farmers, old men, seamstresses. I've got rifles." Marigold turned slightly. From the alley behind the bakery, 5 more of Dustmere's people stepped out. From the rooftops, 3 more appeared. They were surrounded. And Jesse knew it. The smile fell. "You'd risk war?" he asked, voice quieter. "You already started one," Elijah said. Jesse looked to his men. One by one, they lowered their rifles. Even they knew he was done. Marigold stepped closer. "You leave, today, you and anyone still loyal. You cross Dustmere's path again, we won't talk next time." Jesse clenched his jaw. "You don't have authority." She looked around, every face, every hand, every eye. "I do now." He stared at her a long time, then spat into the dirt and walked away. His men followed. The silence that followed was heavier than applause, because Dustmere didn't cheer. It exhaled. Relief, pride, exhaustion. Marigold didn't move until Elijah touched her back. "It's over." "No, it's just beginning." Back in Dustmere, the sky turned golden with sunset. They didn't celebrate with whiskey or wild stories. They ate together, bread passed by hand, laughter creeping in like light. Hallie stitched torn sleeves. Granger dozed beside the fire. Children played shadow games on the chapel wall. Marigold sat beside Elijah on the porch. He held her hand. "You were brave," he said. "I was angry." "Sometimes they're the same," she smiled. "He'll try again. He'll fail." She looked at the stars, at the sky above a town that now stood taller than it ever had. Dustmere wasn't just defended. It was claimed. And from that night forward, every story told in its square began the same. When Marigold stood up, everything changed. But for her, it was never about fame. It was about home. And now, finally, it was hers. Weeks passed like whispers in the wind. Dustmere didn't return to what it had been, because what it had been was gone, replaced by something harder, sharper, more deliberate. The fields kept growing. The children laughed again, and the well behind the chapel never ran dry. But there was a stillness beneath it all, like everyone was waiting for the next ripple in the dust. Marigold walked the edge of the town each morning, not out of fear, out of habit. She learned the pattern of the birds, the way the week leaned in different winds, the sound of boots versus hooves in the distance. Elijah often joined her, saying little, just presence. A steady kind of love that needed no declaring. On the first real warm day of the season, Danner returned. He'd left weeks ago, off to chase rumors of Rourke's remaining lieutenants. He came back thinner, tanned, and quiet. Most of them scattered, he said. One or two were found dead in the hills. Internal cracks, probably. Rourke's kingdom was built on fear. Once the fear broke, it collapsed, Marigold finished. He nodded. Dustmere held a small gathering that night. Not a celebration, just bread, stew, and long looks around the fire. Stories were told. Old ones, not about war, but about the way the sky looked before a thunderstorm, or how Miss Alvey once wrestled a calf to save her best hat. They laughed. And for the first time in months, they laughed without looking over their shoulders. But not everyone found peace. 2 mornings later, a wagon appeared near the edge of town. Empty but for one woman and 2 children. The woman's dress was torn. Her face bore old bruises. The children clung to her like shadows. She didn't speak when they brought her into the chapel, didn't cry. Just placed a piece of parchment in Marigold's hand. It read, "He's not dead." Marigold folded the note, asked no questions. The woman needed rest, not interrogation. But later that night, she stood in the watchtower again. Elijah found her there. "You believe it?" he asked. "Yes. Does it change anything?" She shook her head. "We don't hunt ghosts. But we don't ignore signs either." The council met again. Briefly, no panic. Just clarity. If Rourke had crawled away, he wasn't crawling back strong. Dustmere was different now. It could absorb hits. It could adapt. Still, Elijah posted extra guards for a week. Danner taught the younger ones how to check for false trails and trap triggers. Marigold reorganized the town ledgers in case someone ever tried to strike through supply lines. They didn't live in fear. They lived in preparation. On the 10th day after the woman arrived, she finally spoke. Her name was Miri. She'd once been part of another settlement. A trading post Rourke had absorbed, renamed, and ruled like a warlord. She said he hadn't been seen in weeks, but his second-in-command, a man named Clay, was gathering scraps of the old regime, trying to rebuild. They don't have the people, she said. But they have desperation. That was more dangerous. Marigold asked her to stay. Miri refused. "I came to warn, not to settle. My people might still be out there." Marigold didn't try to stop her. She just packed her a bag. The next morning, Miri rode out, her children holding onto her waist, eyes wide but no longer terrified. Dustmere watched her go. Elijah leaned on the fence beside Marigold. "She's brave. She's broken and still moving. That's more than brave." That night, the chapel lit candles for every person Dustmere had lost. Not names. Just light. For hours, the glow danced on the walls while the town sat in silence. And in that hush, something shifted, not an ending. A balance. The next day, children played tag through the wheat. Hallie opened the school again. Greaves forged a new weather vane for the top of the meeting hall. Danner decided to leave again. "I've got to see if the world's catching up to Dustmere," he told Elijah. "If there are other towns ready to live different." "There are," Elijah said. "They just don't know it yet." Danner chuckled. "That's the kind of optimism I never learned." He left that afternoon. Saddle light, mind lighter. Marigold stood at the ridge, watching him shrink into the horizon. She wasn't sad. Just aware that the world beyond the field still turned, still tested. But Dustmere had become its own kind of truth. She walked back into town with the wind at her back. When she reached the chapel steps, a small boy ran up. "Miss Marigold, Miss Marigold, the new seeds are sprouting." She crouched beside him. "Show me." They ran together toward the field, and behind them, Dustmere stood tall. No banners. No legends. Just roots deep in the soil, and a town that no longer waited for hope, because it had grown its own. The rains returned late that year. Dustmere had learned to wait. It didn't beg the clouds anymore. It planted deeper, hoarded water, adapted. When the sky finally opened, It did so with a grace that felt like mercy-cool, persistent sheets that washed the dust from rooftops and beat the thirst from the soil. Marigold stood barefoot in the chapel yard, arms wide, face up, grinning like a child. Elijah joined her a moment later, coat soaked through, holding out a hand to pull her into the shelter. She didn't take it. "Let it soak me. I earned this," he smiled. "You'll catch a fever. Then I'll catch it clean." They stayed like that until the bell rang, not in warning, but to gather the town for stew and song. Inside, the chapel glowed with candlelight. The pews were pushed back, and a circle of chairs formed where stories could flow. Hallie brought her fiddle. Greaves thumped rhythm on a tin washboard. Even Miss Alvey sang, and her voice, cracked though, carried something fierce and bright. The stories they told weren't of battles. Not anymore. They were of gardens that sprouted too early, of dogs that howled at nothing, of a pair of boots that lasted 12 winters. They were of Dustmere now. The next morning, Marigold visited the fields, not to check them, just to see them. She knelt by a new sprout wheat, barely 2 inches high, ran her fingers across the tiny blades. A sound reached her, then footsteps. She stood. A girl approached, maybe 16. Thin, with sharp eyes and boots too big. "I heard you help people," the girl said. Marigold nodded. "That's the idea." The girl looked past her, to the chapel, the homes, the painted fences. "My name's Wren. I came from east of the range. Our place was taken. Men with torches and promises. They left nothing." Marigold didn't ask for proof. She saw it in the way. Wren didn't flinch when a bird called. In the way she watched every window. "You hungry?" Wren nodded. "Then you're home." That afternoon, Wren was fed, given a bed in the old meeting hall, taught the names of the creek and the chapel and the orchard paths. She didn't speak much, but she listened. And that was enough. A week later, 2 more arrived. Then 5. Then a whole family, cart loaded with everything they could salvage. Marigold never turned one away. Dustmere stretched, not fast, not beyond its means. But it grew. A new forge was started near the edge of town. The orchard added 6 more trees. A second schoolroom was planned. They built with stone now. Fewer fires that way. Fewer fears. One night, Elijah found Marigold staring at the horizon. "They keep coming," she whispered. "They see the light. You think it's too much?" He shook his head. "Not if we remember. Not if we keep building slow, right, honest." She leaned into him. "Promise me something. Anything. If I go someday, you keep this. You hold it together." He wrapped an arm around her. "We hold it, all of us, together." And they did. Years passed. Children born under new stars. Roads widened. A bakery opened, and so did a bookshop. They put up a clock tower, not because they needed the time, but because they finally had it. Granger passed in his sleep, buried with his hammer and a sliver of wheat in his teeth. Hallie painted the inside of the chapel ceiling clouds, birds, endless sky. And one morning, Marigold didn't wake up. She had gone quietly. No pain. No struggle. Just gone. Elijah sat with her until dusk. Then he gathered the town. They didn't weep loudly. They lit candles. And each one stood one by one to say not what she had done, but what she had made possible. "She saw me," Wren said, now a young woman with a forge of her own. "Before I knew who I was. She taught me to listen," said the baker. "She didn't just save Dustmere," said Hallie. "She named it. She gave it back to us." Elijah didn't speak until the end. He stepped forward, held up a small ring, the one she always carried in her coat pocket. "She built something that doesn't die. Not with her. Not ever." He placed the ring inside the chapel wall, sealed it in with stone and mortar. "So when the wind shifts and strangers come and time tries to wear us down, we remember. We were once nothing, And now we are Dustmere. Silence followed, but it wasn't grief, that it was gratitude. Outside, the wheat waved in the dusk, and far above, the clouds Marigold had never stopped. Watching drifted soft across the sky. Dustmere endured. The rains returned late that year. Dustmere had learned to wait. It didn't beg the clouds anymore. It planted deeper, hoarded water, adapted. When the sky finally opened, it did so with a grace that felt like mercy, cool, persistent sheets that washed the dust from rooftops and beat the thirst from the soil. Marigold stood barefoot in the chapel yard, arms wide, face up, grinning like a child. Elijah joined her a moment later, coat soaked through, holding out a hand to pull her into the shelter. She didn't take it. "Let it soak me. I earned this." He smiled. "You'll catch a fever. Then I'll catch it clean." They stayed like that until the bell rang, not in warning, but to gather the town for stew and song. Inside, the chapel glowed with candlelight. The pews were pushed back, and a circle of chairs formed where stories could flow. Hallie brought her fiddle. Greaves thumped rhythm on a tin washboard. Even Miss Alvy sang, and her voice, cracked though it was, carried something fierce and bright. The stories they told weren't of battles. Not anymore. They were of gardens that sprouted too early, of dogs that howled at nothing, of a pair of boots that lasted 12 winters. They were of Dustmere now. The next morning, Marigold visited the fields, not to check them, just to see them. She knelt by a new sprout wheat, barely 2 inches high, ran her fingers across the tiny blades. A sound reached her, then footsteps. She stood. A girl approached, maybe 16. Thin, with sharp eyes and boots too big. "I heard you help people," the girl said. Marigold nodded. "That's the idea." The girl looked past her, to the chapel, the homes, the painted fences. "My name's Wren. I came from east of the range. Our place was taken. Men with torches and promises. They left nothing." Marigold didn't ask for proof. She saw it in the way. Wren didn't flinch when a bird called. In the way she watched every window. "You hungry?" Wren nodded. "Then you're home." That afternoon, Wren was fed, given a bed in the old meeting hall, taught the names of the creek and the chapel and the orchard paths. She didn't speak much, but she listened. And that was enough. A week later, 2 more arrived. Then 5, then a whole family, cart loaded with everything they could salvage. Marigold never turned one away. Dustmere stretched. Not fast, not beyond its means. But it grew. A new forge was started near the edge of town. The orchard added 6 more trees. A second schoolroom was planned. They built with stone now. Fewer fires that way. Fewer fears. One night, Elijah found Marigold staring at the horizon. "They keep coming," she whispered. "They see the light. You think it's too much?" He shook his head. "Not if we remember. Not if we keep building slow, right? Honest." She leaned into him. "Promise me something. Anything. If I go someday, you keep this. You hold it together." He wrapped an arm around her. "We hold it, all of us, together." And they did. Years passed. Children born under new stars. Roads widened. A bakery opened, and so did a bookshop. They put up a clock tower, not because they needed the time, but because they finally had it. Granger passed in his sleep, buried with his hammer and a sliver of wheat in his teeth. Hallie painted the inside of the chapel ceiling. Clouds, birds, endless sky. And one morning, Marigold didn't wake up. She had gone quietly. No pain. No struggle. Just gone. Elijah sat with her until dusk. Then he gathered the town. They didn't weep loudly. They lit candles. And each one stood one by one to say not what she had done, but what she had made possible. "She saw me," Wren said, now a young woman with a forge of her own, "before I knew who I was. She taught me to listen," said the baker. She didn't just save Dustmere, said Hallie. She named it. She gave it back to us. Elijah didn't speak until the end. The seasons turned without hesitation. Winter painted. Dustmere in thick silence, its streets powdered with white, rooftops slouched under snowdrifts, and trees skeletal but strong. Time didn't ask it, simply passed. Yet the people of Dustmere moved with it, never letting it slip too far ahead. Inside the chapel, the bell didn't ring for danger anymore. It marked the passing of seasons, the beginning of harvests, the joining of hands. Wren rang at the morning. Her forge completed its 50th tool for the town, a symbol that even steel, once cold and sharp, could serve warmth and growth. Born after the Rourke years learned Dustmere not as a refuge but as the world itself. To them, it was natural that a stranger at your door meant an extra plate at dinner. That justice required no robes or benches, just gathered hearts and honest hands. Elijah aged slowly, weathered and steady. He took to long walks before sunrise, tracing the paths Marigold once walked. He didn't speak to her ghost. He didn't need to. Her legacy was in the stream that never dried, in the plum trees behind the chapel, in the young girl who delivered bread on Sundays just because. One spring, Wren brought forward a proposal. Build a library, not just books. A place for stories. The ones we tell now. The ones we've lived. They cleared a patch of land near the old schoolhouse, and the entire town helped raise its walls. Children painted murals on its sides, fields of golden wheat, a night sky, a silhouette of a woman looking out across a hill. No name written, but everyone knew. Inside, Wren placed the first entry. Dustmere was born twice, once in the ashes, once in the hands of those who stayed. Pages followed accounts from Hallie, drawings from the children, poems from Elijah written with sparse words and heavy weight. Each story found a place. Each voice mattered. Visitors trickled in from neighboring towns. They came curious, cautious, and they left quiet, changed. Some stayed. Some took seeds or ideas or just the memory of how a town could feel like family. On the 10th anniversary of the town's rebirth, they held a quiet vigil. No speeches, just a walk. A circle around the town perimeter. Each family carried a lantern. Each lantern held a name. Some were for the lost. Some were for the ones still coming. When they reached the chapel, Elijah stepped forward last. He held his lantern up. For the one who didn't just lead us. She believed us into being. Then he set it down, and the lights glowed long into the night. Later that year, Elijah passed, not suddenly, not painfully. Just like her, they buried him beneath the tallest tree in Dustmere, the one that had grown from a cutting she once planted. Wren spoke at his service. Just a sentence. He kept the promise. And then there was silence, the respectful kind. The permanent kind. But Dustmere didn't stall. It moved forward. With care, with joy. New traditions blossomed. A day for planting. A day for weaving. A day when the town cooked one meal together. The library added a children's wing. A weather station. A section for songs. Years stretched out in one day. A boy named Reed found an old journal tucked beneath floorboards of the meeting hall. It was Marigold's, half-filled, most pages blank. But the ones that were written in held a clarity that struck. Deeper than scripture. I did not come here to lead. I came because I was broken. Dustmere didn't fix me. It let me keep walking. That's all we can do for each other. Make walking possible. Reed copied the passage and painted it above the chapel arch. And when people passed beneath it, they did not lower their heads, they lifted them. The town stretched beyond its borders, slowly, carefully. A creekside mill, a wind harness on the ridge. But the heart of Dustmere never left the square. It pulsed in laughter, in work, in the sound of the bell now rung by a girl named Ada, who had been born the day Jesse Rourke fled. One summer, a stranger asked her, "What keeps this place from falling apart?" She blinked, then said, we remember. And that was enough, because Dustmere had learned, revolutions do not always come in flame. Sometimes, they come in bread shared between neighbors, in quiet mornings, in never locking the door, and in the stories you leave behind, not carved in stone, but carried in the mouths of those who live better because you lived first. Dustmere stood, and would continue to, for as long as one person believed in the soil beneath their feet, and the strength of hands that held each other up when all else tried to pull them down. The end, he stepped forward, held up a small ring, the one she always carried in her coat pocket. She built something that doesn't die, not with her. Not ever. He placed the ring inside the chapel wall, sealed it in with stone and mortar. So when the wind shifts and strangers come and time tries to wear us down, we remember. We were once nothing, and now we are Dustmere. Silence followed, but it wasn't grief, it was gratitude. Outside, the wheat waved in the dusk, and far above, the clouds' marigold had never stopped. Watching drifted soft across the sky. Dustmere endured.